Welcome back to Bisexual Killjoy, the place where we know bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. I'm Bailey, and Jace is unable to be with us here today because they are good at knowing when a sick day is warranted, so you are saddled with me. But, we're still going to have a good time, and by the time this episode comes out, it'll be March, my favorite month of the year, which is Bi Plus Health Awareness Month. And we Bisexual Killjoys are very passionate about making sure Bi Plus folks have the resources and information they need to care for their health in ways that are most accessible to them. And because we like you all so much, we called on the incomparable Dr. Mimi for today's episode, Bi Plus Minds Matter. Hi, Dr. Mimi.
Hi, thank you so much for having on the show.
Of course, and I will just say that Dr. Mimi Hoang is an internationally recognized psychologist, life coach, public speaker, community organizer specializing in LGBTQ+, Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. And since the 1990s, she has co-founded 3 organizations for bisexual, pansexual, and fluid, Bi Plus if you're nasty, individuals, the Los Angeles Bi Plus Task Force, amBi Los Angeles, and Fluid at UCLA. Dr. Mimi has authored multiple publications and earned a seat at the landmark 2013 White House Bisexual Community Roundtable, which sparked her focus on Bi Plus affirmative counseling and mental health. And her steadfast leadership has earned her multiple awards and recognitions, including being one of Go Magazine's 100 Women We Love and being named one of the most significant women in the bisexual movement. And again, thank you so much. Jace was so bummed that they missed this because they are a huge fan. Yeah, I'll bet I am as well. But Jace was like, Mimi, oh no.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm sad that they couldn't join us either, but I am such a proponent of self-care. Mm-hmm. So, sometimes you just have to know when you have to stop and rest.
Exactly. And that's what's important about having a team and a community, for someone to say, yes, I agree, please lay down. But as everyone here on the podcast knows, Bi Plus folks face immense health inequity, and we have even less information on how these struggles impact Bi Plus communities of color and at other political and social intersections. Because, we're big fans of your work in particular, as these past couple of years you've hosted the B Plus Well Conference to talk about those issues with fellow Bi Plus health advocates. Now, on a personal clinical level, what are some of the biggest obstacles you've seen your Bi Plus clients face, and how does that compare to what you see in the research?
I think I'm seeing everything, out on the ground, as I put it, in my office. There are definitely higher rates of depression, anxiety, all of that. And, I've been really trying to wrap my head around it to try to understand and try to help my community. And so I've started actually coining the term bi blues, right? Because there's just sort of these waves or a sense of sadness and distress, or even kind of a fogginess that sometimes bi, pan, or fluid people face about their identities. There's something that feels fuzzy. There's something that feels off. People don't feel accepted or included or not clear about who they are. And so all of that, I felt sort of could be explained by sort of this phenomenon of the bi blues, which, happened to me actually, and I've spoke about this on other podcasts and interviews, but in college, I was feeling down and I didn't know why, even though so much good stuff was happening in my life, but I just felt down inexplicably. And so going to a therapist and, having that person help and finding community and mentorship. And after I came out as bisexual, my depression lifted. And so I think that is something that is still happening. And coming out, I think these days can look a little different for different generations. I've been around a little while. And so I've seen, some of the older folks, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, struggling with coming out in different ways. So I think those of us who were older, we may have come out later in life. And that can present its own challenges, when you've maybe lived some life and you've had some partners and now you're coming out, after you get married or after you have kids or grandkids. It can be really kind of shocking and disruptive in many ways. I think younger folks are now coming out at younger ages, which I think is really wonderful to see in many, many ways. The only, I think, sometimes downside to that is that minors still are living with their parents and their families and parents might not be accepting, or their schools, and so there could be bullying, there could be rejection, there could be trauma and abuse that happens in that kind of realm. So, that I can, have started seeing some of these generational differences. I think dating and developing romantic relationships where your partner really can fully support you in your bisexuality. I've also continued to see that. I think a lot of us who are with gay or straight partners may not feel fully seen for all of the sides of us, right? And so that can create a bit of a incongruence, as I call it, with someone's identity. And then, there can sometimes be the darker sides of just being abused, harassed. There's biphobia, bi-erasure, but sometimes it can, lend itself to sexual harassment, sexual assault. I have seen all of that in the work that I do, unfortunately. And so it is real, these statistics that we read about.
Yeah. And, the unfortunate reality is that we just don't have as much research as we would like around bi plus populations, right? Mm-hmm. And then because on the one hand, yes, we're collecting all of these data points and we're seeing trends, but something that we brought up last season with Allison Cipriano, who talked about bi plus positivity as a form of resiliency. Resiliency for bi plus populations is something only now being touched at. When you're working with your clients who have disclosed the fact that they're bi plus, what do you impart to them to be resilient so that they can, get through these wild times we find ourselves in?
Yeah, I love that. I love the focus on resiliency, on positive psychology, right? Because we have talked a lot about, what makes us sick, what makes us unwell, but we really need to understand what makes us well, right? What are those factors that help people recover or cope and continue to live and survive and thrive, hopefully. And so, I think it really starts from inside, is really developing self-knowledge and self-love of who you are. And I always put self-knowledge first because you can't love yourself if you don't know yourself.
True.
Right? So you have to be able to first learn about who am I? Who do I like? Who turns me on? Who do I want to be with? And so that developing that self-knowledge can then grow into that self-love and self-acceptance. And then hopefully expressing yourself, right? So kind of in the outer world is bringing yourself out, whether that's in who you are dating, who you're having sex with, your community, how you dress even, right? All of those things are your self-expressions. And then you can start to empower yourself and grow your village and hopefully find mentorship and community out there. So those are, some of the things that I talk about in my coaching with my clients and in the community. And I also say, because a lot of times people try to sort of gay-splain or hetero-splain, as I call it, what or who we are.
Yeah.
And I say, it's not up for debate, your sexual identity. Only you know who you are. Only you know who you like. And so don't let another person tell you who you are, right? And so that, I think, is the core of developing that resiliency.
Absolutely. I think something that we have heard, both Jason and I, in our respective research and our interviews with bi plus people across the country, is that they know themselves, but they struggle to find that community connection because many bi plus people, and you're nodding your head because you know it's coming, is we don't feel like we fit. We don't feel like we have a community. And unfortunately, since COVID, a lot of our bi plus spaces have been disappearing, although we are trying to claw ourselves back up. And LA has, historically done a great job of doing this. But what would you say to those people who are like, I know who I am, I want to build my community, but I don't know where to go?
Yeah, no, I am such a proponent of finding community. I grew up in a very collectivistic culture, being Asian American, being an immigrant. You have to find others to survive. You can't go it alone. And unfortunately, a lot of bi and pan folks come out in isolation. But, once you do come out, I definitely encourage you to find a community group out there. And there are virtual groups. In some ways, COVID really created a widespread use of, virtual groups. And many of the groups out there welcome people from all areas, out of state, because we know about the lack of community. But if there isn't a bi group near you that you would like to go to, like an in-person group, I would say create one yourself. I think sometimes you need to be the first and you need to be that brave person to create a group. And if you create it, they will come. I co-founded amBi Los Angeles in 2006. And it was because I had seen another bisexual group in Los Angeles that was happening before that in the 80s and 90s, BiNet LA.
Mm-hmm.
But they disbanded, which is unfortunately sometimes what happens to local groups is that they ebb and they flow. But I just felt so strongly that, hey, we're in Los Angeles. We're in a huge, city. We have so much diversity here. We need to have a bisexual group. And so what I did was I put a call out for anyone who was interested in meeting for coffee once a month. I chose a coffee shop that I felt was in a good bi-friendly, LGBT-friendly neighborhood. And I chose a day and a time, and 10 people showed up at that very first meeting. And so that's how it all started. And it really grew from there. And people just really felt so supported coming to a space where they felt accepted, where they didn't have to explain everything about who they were.
Yeah.
And as amBi grew, the group grew and people were driving 2 hours to come to our meetings, and so we really could see the impact and the importance of having that kind of space. Later, I helped to co-found the Los Angeles Bi Plus Task Force in 2008, which in a way is a community space as well. But because we're a nonprofit organization, we have more of a mission, we have projects. We try to educate the public and create cultural enrichment and advocacy. And so it's a little bit different, but, we've been able to put on large events like the Bi Arts Fest to honor Bi Visibility Day. We've been able to publish a community needs assessment, which was just really important, data to collect about what our community needs. And then most recently was the Bi Plus Well conference in 2024, which was a one-day conference promoting wellness for our community. And so, I think it's just another way of getting that mirroring that we don't really get because, we live in such a binary world. It's gay or it's straight.
Yeah.
And so it's really a special thing to be in a room with folks who just are like you, who are not gay or not straight. And, I think it's just a beautiful way to receive support and to really improve your wellness.
Yeah. And I want to touch on two things you just said. When the LA Bi Plus Task Force did its needs assessment, what were some of the top things that came out of that report? What do Bi Plus people need?
Yeah. So we asked some questions about, did you want to feel more connected to the mainstream LGBT community? And did you want to feel connected to the mainstream straight community? And I think people really wanted connection to the queer community. And so, not that it's that terribly surprising to me, but I think that it may be busting some stereotypes, right? That, Bi Plus folks are not a part of the queer community, don't want to be a part of the queer community. But, the evidence was there. It was very strong that Bi Plus folks see themselves as queer. So that was definitely something that, really stood out. We also asked about their experiences with health professionals.
Yeah.
Because, since I was spearheading the needs assessment, of course, I was like, we're going to ask about the health stuff. And so we asked about their experiences with physical health providers, psychological health, and sexual health providers. And we saw that people were having relatively positive, like mildly positive experiences to maybe more strongly positive, but there was still room for improvement. And, my eye really was caught for the mental health providers, that there was definitely still room for improvement there. And people wrote comments about some of their experiences with therapists.
Really?
And, some of them were really not good. That some of them said that their therapists just assumed that bisexuals were exactly the same as gay people, or they didn't believe in bisexuality.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so, that was really, really terrible to hear. that, my colleagues were still out there, doing that and really, really injuring, people emotionally.
Yeah.
And so, this came after I went to the White House in 2013. And so I really wanted to come back to my local community and to find out how is my community doing. And so to hear that and to see those results, I was really so motivated to really push for bisexual mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to combine my work as a clinical psychologist with my community activism. And I really started to amplify, that in my work.
I want our listeners, many of whom are bi plus themselves, but some who aren't, some people who listen to this show to get more educated about bi plus issues, which I love them for. But sometimes this comes up in my work, which is what is different about bi plus people from queer people? Like, what's special about them? Why not just queer mental health?
Yeah, I mean, we are similar in many ways, but I think we're also different in many ways. I mean, we're similar in the sense that we are not straight, right? We're not, hetero only. We don't only like people who are of the other genders. So we then have this sort of coming out experience, right? Because everyone assumes that's heteronormativity, is that you're straight. And so we go through that sometimes very painful process of realizing that we're not straight. And so we do go through some of that and dealing with rejection and all of that. The only thing is that we also date people who are of different genders than us, right? And so our experiences are going to be a little bit varied. We're not only dating or attracted to people of the same gender. And so our lives might just sort of take a different turn. We might feel invisible in that way because we are sort of that, we look like a typical straight couple. And then we also face negativity from the gay and lesbian community, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so, that's where things start to then kind of, derail a bit. And so, I think it's just something that's important if you are, out there in the field to know some of these nuances.
Yeah, this is something that I prepared a paper for providers, like healthcare providers, to say, bi plus populations are unique and you have more patients who are bi plus than you probably think, just statistically speaking.
Yeah.
And something that we want providers to know is that it does matter. It matters that you're educated on bi plus health issues. It matters that you know that your bi plus patients are at higher risk for depression and anxiety and suicidality, and you should know how to get them connected to relevant resources. Now, I think that there's kind of this issue within queer spaces themselves. Some broader queer orgs are not prepared to help bi plus people looking for resources. What advice would you have for those broader orgs to do better for their bi plus populations?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. And, you want to look at policies, you want to look at wording and languaging and marketing, because, when you're speaking about things like diversity or culture, are you just saying gay and lesbian? Right? Because we're going to catch that.
Yeah, we are.
We're going to notice when the B and the T and Q and I and A are missing, right? And so I think when an organization is using very, very outdated or binary languaging in that way, we're going to notice it and we're going to question and feel skeptical of, am I going to feel safe going into this clinic, into this organization? Will I be accepted, et cetera? So I think when an org doesn't have, the B and the T, that's going to affect us. And, are there programs, events? Is there funding that is being, right? Where's the money?
Where's the money?
Is that there to support sort of bi-specific things? Because, queer events and programming will help, but we may also need bi-specific programs because, again, our lives look just slightly different. We might have partners, and be in mixed gender relationships, And so I think that, having those programs is going to help. Having leadership, right? So I also look at that, like who's on your leadership? Is there representation? Who are the trainings that are being done? Is there bi-specific training when you're talking about like queer training or LGBTQ training? Is there the B in all of that as well?
And I will say that so many of the bi orgs that are out there offer training. It's just a matter of approaching them and saying, would you do a training for my team? Would you do training for my organization? It's not that hard. The resources are out there, y'all.
Yes, we are there. We are definitely there. I think people just don't realize that they need a training on bisexuality. I think sometimes I find that people think that it's the same being sort of just bi-friendly versus being bi-affirmative. And there really is a difference because, on the one hand, if you're bi-friendly, you're like, oh, I would see a bi client, like I'll open, my office or my services. Or, I promise not to use a bi slur and, be mean to bisexual people. But that's different from really being affirmative, where you are actually like learning and educating yourself about all the nuances of bisexuality coming out and all of that. You're really truly accepting bisexual as being on par with being gay or straight. And you know about what biphobia might look like, what bi-erasure might look like. And so you're really helping your clients, students, et cetera, with dealing with the oppressions, right? So being aware of power and privilege and how that's going to impact that bisexual person. And really trying to take an active approach to uplifting that person who's experiencing a lot of minority stress. So it's very different when you're affirmative versus just sort of passively being bi-friendly.
I absolutely love that because being bi-friendly means you'll just take my money. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yes.
Bi-affirmative is where it's at. And also, it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be a monumental task to educate yourself on this. But you did say one of my favorite things, which is about sort of the specific type of erasure that bi plus people face, right? And it's double erasure. It's the erasure in straight spaces and queer spaces. And because of it, like I said, like we don't feel like we belong. And some questions that we've gotten from listeners and I've gotten from bi plus people out in the wild is, why should I come out to my doctor? Why does it matter? And I get tongue tied around it because I know that it matters in my heart. And as a researcher, I know that it matters, but it's hard to articulate why, especially if you feel safe enough to do it. I will give that caveat.
Yeah, well, if you can't tell your doctor, who can you tell, right? They are someone who is working intimately with you on your health, on your body, or they're your therapists, right? And it's a confidential relationship. And so, if you can't tell them your identity, then there's really something wrong with that provider. And maybe you need to fire them. But, it's like any question that they're going to ask you on the form. What is your gender? What is your occupation? What is your address? Like, your sexual orientation is just one of those questions where you need to be honest. And so that they can fully know you and understand you, right? Now, if there's someone who has received some education around, minority stress, then they'll be able to really know what health risks to look for, for your situation, what stressors you might be experiencing as a bi plus person because of, again, all of those sad statistics, out there. And so that they also don't assume the gender of your partner. Right. So I feel like it's like a nice way to just set the stage to let them know that you might have a male partner, female partner, non-binary partner. So yeah, I tell all my health providers, I tell my dentist.
Lead with it.
And
hello, my name is Bailey. I'm bisexual.
I mean, you could do that, but as I'm like talking and, they're asking, how's your weekend? And I'm like, oh yeah, I went to this bisexual event. And, sometimes it creates an interesting conversation. Maybe they're going to learn something about me or about my community because I'm speaking about it in such a normal, nonchalant way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, why hide it? Right? Is that something that you're doing, as opposed to just kind of being natural about it?
Yeah. It is a part of who you are and is both a big deal and not a big deal, right?
Yes.
The thing we hear also is, well, if I'm in a monogamous relationship and I'm not having sex outside that relationship, doesn't matter that I own my bisexual label, my pansexual label, my plurisexual label. To which I say yes, but Dr. Mimi, what would you say to that?
Because it's your identity. It's not who's in your bed. It's who's in your heart.
Yeah, that's that.
I kind of compare it to being, let's say, like biracial.
Mm-hmm.
And, let's say you have a partner that, is of one of the ethnicities that you are. Would you hide that you also have another, ethnic background? I hope not, right? Why not still proclaim that, you're mixed race? And so it's just telling people about your identity. It's not about like who you're sleeping with. I think people just sort of overly emphasize that as opposed to just making it about who you are as a person.
Yeah, despite the sex being in the name, it's not all about sex, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Something that I would like to talk a little bit more about, just as a researcher and also as an organizer, you talking about, intersections of sexuality and intersection of sexuality and race. Now, something that we see in the literature is a lack of representation for BIPOC folks who also identify as BI+. How can researchers do a better job at doing outreach so that we can get better representational data?
Yeah, that just is an important thing across the board because I think just so many studies are based on white college students,
mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of like the easy sample and subject pool. But, it's really about learning about where your communities are. And so maybe not doing those convenient samples, but thinking a little bit more outside of the box and, maybe tapping into some leaders in certain communities and then, collaborating and partnering with those community leaders so that then, they can get the word out, but also building trust, of course, right? So especially if you're not BIPOC, you want to definitely build trust. So, I think we sometimes default to what is convenient, but, unfortunately what happens is that so many studies are not representative of the BIPOC experience. But we're out there, actually there's many more BIPOC people who identify as bisexual. But why are we not necessarily seeing that or hearing about it or reading articles about it or seeing it on TV or in movies, right? So again, we just need to look at, where are we going? Are we just taking the easy route? Because it's the same-o that we're seeing.
It really is. And I think a big part of that is also how siloed research is from everyday life and how much more work would get done if researchers partnered with, these organizations and built that trust and say, hey, this is the research that we're doing and why we're doing it. This is what we hope to achieve by doing this research. Because if I have to read one more BI+ paper that ends with, we just need more research, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to crash out, okay, fully. I think that's why this podcast works for Jace and I is because Jace is very much our academic. That's what they do. They are the researcher. They live and breathe BI+ research. And then it's my job to sort of translate that to a place where people like me can understand it.
Yeah. And, I think you also bring up the point about being able to translate things so that the lay person out there can digest, the things coming out of academia. And so I think that's also important too. But that's where, again, that partnership between the, university or the researcher versus a community is going to be really, really important so that, when you're operationalizing your variables or defining like who is your research subject, does it make sense? Does it actually make sense in the real world?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're looking at bisexuality, what are you actually measuring? Are you measuring only people who self-identify as bisexual? Are you measuring people who are behaviorally bisexual or people who are attracted in a bisexual way? And so, you're going to get different numbers when you look at each of those different layers, is what I've seen. And so that's also going to make a difference. And are you clumping in gay, lesbian, and bisexual, gay, lesbian, bi, pan, queer? And then how are you analyzing the data? Are you breaking it down into the different identity groups? Are you just kind of clumping everything together? Because then that can then create a little bit more of like a muddy picture. But because, in 2013, when all of us got together and went to the White House, we started to really push for that, is disaggregating that data so that we could know how our community specifically is doing. And that's when we were just like shocked.
Yeah.
That we're doing worse than the gays and lesbians. And so that's why it's important to be specific about who you're measuring and how are you reporting on that.
Why do you think bi plus people are doing worse when compared to gay and lesbian populations?
Well, I think I mentioned it a bit, but, just not really having that community, not feeling like you can be fully in the gay community or straight community. It creates this, what's been, coined the cultural homelessness.
Ooh.
Yeah. So it just can make us feel lost in that way. So, I think people sometimes think that it's easier to be bisexual because doesn't it mean you're only 50% gay or 50% queer? No, actually, we're like queerer than queer. Mm-hmm. We're so different. We're more different. And we're experiencing this rejection, this dismissal, like, oh, well, bi now, gay later, all of those things. So there's just constantly these microaggressions and rejection. And that pays a toll, on people emotionally and mentally and physically. So, that's why, again, we go back to the importance of community and finding that, because that is going to help your mental health.
And the thing about bi plus people is we do make beautiful community, right? We have so much fun and we're so welcoming. That's one of my favorite things about the bi plus community is how we just open arms. Sure, get on in here. Get on in here. A lot lives underneath this umbrella. We don't need to fuss about it.
We love everybody.
We do. That's our whole thing, right?
Yes, we welcome everyone to our events and our, programs, gay, straight, bi, queer, everybody, trans, non-binary, genderqueer. I mean, just the vastness of the different identities that I've seen in these bi plus groups, it just warms my heart. I feel like we're just like the most open-minded community.
I totally agree because we know what it's like to be shut out and told you don't belong here. So, you know what? We'll do it ourselves and everyone's welcome, even you and your bad attitude.
All are welcome.
And now that you're gearing up for this next iteration of the conference, could you talk a little bit more about that and what your goals and hopes are for it?
Yeah, well, we were so excited to host our inaugural B Plus Wall conference last year. It had been something I had been really hoping and dreaming of doing as one of my passion projects, just because we've been able to create, these different groups and orgs here out in Los Angeles. And because of my, background as a mental health clinician, I just felt like we need a conference focused on health and wellness. And a conference really where people will be able to work on their healing. So not just something that's like lectures and very academic, but something where you'll really learn, you'll talk, you'll do role plays and activities, movement, all of that, and really absorb that lovely bi magic that comes from all that. And so that's really what we aimed for last year. We had workshops that were really interactive, that were led by therapists or sex educators, and also artists, writers and artists. And we just got such positive feedback and people were like, are you going to do this again next year? And I said, I hope so if I get help. Right? Because, hey, it takes a lot to plan a conference, but I was able to do it again. And so this time I'll be chairing the 2025 B Plus Wall Conference, and it'll be at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. And it'll be a one-day conference again We're promoting physical, emotional, sexual, and cultural wellness. And we will have wonderful speakers, wonderful activities and workshops. We're going to feed you. There will be a resource fair again where you can, interact with different groups and hopefully really make friends and, lasting friendships and connections.
That's so wonderful to know that there are more bi+ things happening, things to go to, things to interact with. It's one of the joys, again, that COVID really robbed from the community. And I'm happy to see the spark kind of coming back and more people, new people are tending the flames. And that in itself is also very exciting because we need to keep fostering the next generation of bi+ advocates and organizers and saying, hey, you can do this too. You can do this too. I promise. I'll show you how.
Yeah. I mean, so many people, I think, are really craving that in-person experience and social gathering. And of course, there's a place for virtual gatherings, always, but there's something really unique about meeting in person, seeing everyone in 3D, and I think that people are going to hopefully really make some solid connections where, you'll get each other's contact information. And yeah, we're always trying to inspire the next generation of folks. I'm leading the charge in some ways, but also passing the baton to others that are out there who are younger, newer, who want to create fresh things because we always have room for that in our community.
Yes, bi+ is about expansion and not restriction.
That is right. Bi and beyond.
Yes, bi and beyond. Is there anything else this year that we can be on the lookout from you?
Well, there's always things that I'm cooking. So
always.
Yeah. I mean, I'm continuing to lead my Bi on Life and Bi on Love series. Those are my coaching series to help people with really improving their self-knowledge, self-love, and self-empowerment. And so look for that. And I'm maybe hopefully speaking at a university near you, or if you have an organization that would like me to come speak, please bring me your way.
Yeah, bring Dr. Mimi to your org and teach people how to treat bi+ patients. Thank you very much. Well, Dr. Mimi, it is such a pleasure to have you and to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is bi+ mental health. Thank you for being a bisexual killjoy and embodying that spirit with such fervor. And thank you all for tuning into Bisexual Killjoy, where we do know that bisexuality isn't a phase, it's a phenomenon. To support us, you can share us with your friends, subscribe to our Substack, and rate our podcast preferably 5 stars. We still want to hear from you as always. You can share your stories with us on Instagram or via email at bisexualkilljoy@gmail.com. We'd love to answer your questions in our advice column, Give It To Me Bi+. So check out the Substacks for more details on that. And until next time, keep being a bisexual killjoy, stay bisexual, and stay strong.